The log entry was short. Subject 7F gave away her last meal again. Third time this lunar cycle. We have no variable for this. The model keeps breaking. Sen stared at the screen. Then he looked through the observation glass at the woman below. She didn't know the glass was there. She thought it was a storage unit wall. All 340 humans on Helix 7 thought that. None of them knew the Kareth Institute had been watching for 3 years. Her name was Mara Osei. She was 41 years old. Medium height. Tired eyes. Hands that never stopped moving. She worked 16-hour shifts in the colony medical bay. She had no assistant. The equipment was old. Half of it she had fixed herself with parts she ordered from a catalog 6 months out of date. She was not special. That was the point. The Kareth Institute didn't study remarkable humans. They studied ordinary ones. The Institute's founding principle was simple: to understand a species, observe the average specimen under pressure. Mara Osei was supposed to be average. 3 years later, Sen was no longer sure what she was. It started small. Day 4 of the study. A child fell from a maintenance ladder. Broken arm. Mara set it without proper tools, using 2 metal rods and a strip torn from her own jacket. Sen logged it. Resourceful. Within expected parameters. Day 19. A water recycler failed. Mara spent 30 hours awake tracing the fault. She had no engineering training. She fixed it anyway. Adaptive. Within expected parameters. Day 67. An elderly man named Oren refused to eat. He had lost his wife 2 weeks before. He sat in his quarters and stared at the wall. Mara visited him every day. She didn't counsel him. She didn't bring pamphlets. She just sat with him. Sometimes she talked. Sometimes she didn't. On day 12 of her visits, Oren ate half a bowl of food. Sen wrote, "Behavior unclear. Flagging for review." His supervisor, a senior researcher named Vath, reviewed the clip. She watched Mara sit in silence beside the old man. She watched the old man's hands slowly unclench. Vath said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "Continue monitoring." The study was supposed to last 1 year. They extended it to 2. Then 3. By year 2, 17 other researchers had quietly requested access to the Helix 7 feed. Sen had stopped asking why. He just granted it. By year 3, the Helix 7 file was the most accessed behavioral study in the Institute's 200-year history. And still nobody could explain it. The day everything changed was day 1091. It started with a storm. Helix 7 sat at the edge of a gas belt. Twice a year, electromagnetic bursts swept through. The colony was built to handle them. The shields held. The lights flickered. Life went on. This storm was different. It hit at 0300 hours. Station time. Most of the colony was asleep. The first shield layer failed in 11 seconds. The second in 4. The backup power system, which had been flagged for repair 8 months ago and never fixed, made a sound like a crack and went dark. 340 humans woke up in blackness. In the observation bay, every screen went white, then dark, then white again. Emergency lighting kicked in. Red. Sen grabbed the edge of his console. "Sensors," he said. His assistant scrambled. "Get me eyes." The cameras came back one by one. Flickering. Unstable. The colony was in chaos. People were running. Some were shouting. A section of the outer corridor had depressurized, not fully, but enough. Warning lights strobed everywhere. In the medical bay, every cabinet had thrown open and the floor was covered in supplies. Mara Osei was already awake. She hadn't panicked. Sen didn't see the moment she woke up. But by the time the cameras found her, she was already dressed and moving, a flashlight in one hand, a radio in the other. She was talking fast but clearly. "Tomas. You there? I need a head count on Corridor D, don't wait for command. Just do it." A crackle. A voice confirming. She was already moving. "Levi." Another voice. "Get to the med bay. Don't touch anything on the floor yet. Wait for me." She turned a corner. "Yanni, the Oran wing. Go. The older residents won't know what's happening. Don't explain. Just be there." Sen watched her move through the flickering corridors. She wasn't running. Her steps were fast but controlled. She stopped twice to help people who had fallen. She spoke to each one for exactly as long as they needed, then kept moving. She didn't have authority. She wasn't a commander. She held no official colony rank above medic grade 2. But every person she spoke to moved immediately. Without question. Without hesitation. Sen pulled up 3 months of behavioral mapping. He had data on every human in the colony. Social connections. Influence patterns. Communication networks. He had seen Mara at the center of those maps before. He had logged it as statistical noise. He looked at it again now. Really looked. She wasn't at the center because she was loud. She was at the center because for 3 years, she had shown up. Every time. For every person. Without being asked. Without reward. Without recognition. 340 people trusted her. Not because she had power. Because she had never once used them to get it. By 0500 hours, the worst was over. The storm had passed. 2 shield layers were still down. Power was at 40%. 14 people had minor injuries. Nobody was dead. Mara sat on the floor of the medical bay. She had been working for 2 hours straight. Her hands were shaking now. That was the first time Sen had seen them shake. She pressed them flat against her knees until they stopped. Then she looked up. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, was standing in the doorway. Holding a dented cup. Steam rising from it. "My mom said to bring you this," the girl said. Mara looked at the cup for a long moment. "What is it?" she asked. "Tea." She said, "It's the real kind." She was saving it. Mara's face did something complicated. She took the cup with both hands. "Tell her thank you," she said quietly. "Tell her it's the best thing I've had in months." The girl smiled and ran. Mara held the cup and stared at the floor and breathed. Sen had no variable for this either. He watched her for a long time. Then he opened a new log entry. He stared at the blank field for almost 3 minutes. He had written thousands of behavioral summaries. He had studied 31 species. He had never once written anything outside the standard clinical format. He typed. "We came here to understand why humans are inefficient. Why they expend resources on members who cannot contribute. Why they maintain bonds that serve no evolutionary function. We have been watching the wrong metric. I am formally requesting a meeting with the Institute's full board. I have findings that cannot be transmitted through standard channels. The subject, Subject 7F, Mara Osei, is not an anomaly. I believe she is the pattern." He stopped. Stared at what he had written. Then he added one more line. "And I believe we have made a very serious mistake." He hit send. Then he looked through the glass again at the woman on the floor. She had finished the tea. She was already standing. Already moving. Already walking toward the next person who needed her. What Sen didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 14 months ago, Mara Ose had found something behind a storage panel in Corridor C. A wire. That wasn't colony issue. She hadn't reported it. She hadn't touched it. She had simply noted the exact location, gone back to work, and said nothing to anyone. Not yet. The board had 12 members. They sat in a curved row. High seats. Cold light. The kind of room designed to make the person standing in the center feel small. Sen stood in the center. He had not slept in 3 days. It showed. You requested an emergency session, said Board Chair Ven. Her voice was flat. Controlled. You said findings could not be transmitted through standard channels. She folded her hands. Explain. Sen pulled up the helix 7 feed on the main display. I will show you, he said. Then I will explain. He played the storm footage. Unedited. Full length. Mara moving through dark corridors. Mara kneeling beside a woman who was hyperventilating. Mara pressing the woman's hand flat against her own chest. Breathing slowly. Waiting until the woman's breathing matched hers. Nobody in the board chamber spoke. He played Day 67. Oren and the empty bowl. Mara sitting in silence. The old man's hands slowly unclenching. Still nobody spoke. He played 43 other clips. He had organized them by category. Problem solving. Resource allocation. Conflict mediation. Grief response. He had a clip for each one. Every clip showed the same woman. Every clip showed something the Institute's behavioral models could not explain. When he finished, the chamber was very quiet. Board member Rail, the oldest in the room, leaned forward. How long have you been withholding this assessment? I haven't been withholding it, Sen said. I didn't understand it until 3 days ago. What changed 3 days ago? The storm gave me a controlled condition I couldn't create artificially. He pulled up the network map. 340 names. Lines connecting them. Mara's name at the center. Under acute crisis conditions, the subject's behavioral network didn't collapse. It activated. Every connection she had built over 3 years became functional infrastructure in under 4 minutes. I'm telling you so you're prepared. We're prepared, Mara said. Dara looked at the document on Mara's screen. She couldn't read the full contents from the door. But she could see the length of it. The structure. The careful organization. Something moved across her face. Brief. She left without saying anything else. Kareth Institute. Central Board Chamber. Day 12. 0900 hours. The chamber was larger in person. Mara had seen it in Sen's transmission files. Footage from his emergency session. It had looked cold and formal on screen. In person it was colder. More formal. 12 board members in their curved high seats. Pale light from above. The floor of the speaking area was a different material from the rest, slightly raised, slightly isolated. Designed to remind whoever stood on it that they were being evaluated. 6 humans walked to the center and stood on it. Mara looked up at the board. 12 faces. Different species. All watching with the particular quality of attention that experts use, measuring before the first word is spoken. Board Chair Ven spoke first. This session has been convened at the request of Envoy Dara following an irregular development in the Helix 7 observation study. Her voice filled the chamber easily. Representatives of the human colony have requested the opportunity to address the board regarding the Tier 9 classification of their species. The board has agreed to hear this address before making a final determination. She paused. You have 1 hour. 1 hour. Tomas stepped forward first. He spoke for 20 minutes. Clean and precise. The charter provisions. The precedents. The procedural argument that a classification built on covert observation of a non-consenting population was methodologically compromised under the Institute's own ethical guidelines that existed, he noted, because the compact had already made this mistake once before, with a species called the Veth, 40 years ago. Several board members shifted at that. The Veth precedent was apparently not a comfortable reference. Good. Tomas had known it wouldn't be. He finished. Stepped back. Mara stepped forward. The chamber was quiet. She had no data pad. No notes. She had read and reread everything so many times that it lived in her now. She didn't need paper. She looked up at the board. "I want to tell you about a man named Oren," she said. Her voice was calm. Clear. The same voice she used in the medical bay. The same voice she used in dark corridors during storms. He was 67 years old. He came to Helix 7 with his wife. She died 14 months into their posting. Cardiac event. I couldn't save her. She paused. Oren stopped eating. He stopped leaving his quarters. In your files he is subject 44M. The log entry reads, grief response, duration atypical, monitoring continued. She let that sit in the air. He wasn't a variable, she said. He was a person who had lost the most important thing in his life. And what your study recorded, what your researchers logged as anomalous behavior outside expected parameters, was me sitting with him. Every day. Until he decided to stay. The chamber was very still. You spent 3 years trying to understand why humans do things that don't compute, she said. Why we give away our last meal. Why we sit with people who cannot give us anything back. Why we build connections that serve no measurable function. She looked along the row of faces. You framed those things as inefficiencies. As evidence of our limitations. She reached into her coat and placed a data chip on the small stand in front of her. That chip contains your own data, she said. Every clip. Every log. Every network map. I have added one thing. A second column next to each of your entries. She paused. Your column says what you saw. My column says what was actually happening. Nobody spoke. The storm, she said. Your log reads, subject coordinated colony response in absence of formal command structure. Mechanism unclear. My column reads, 340 people trusted one person because that person had shown up for each of them, without being asked, without reward, for 3 years. When the lights went out, they already knew where to turn. She looked at Ven. That's not an unclear mechanism. That's a community. You just don't have a word for it in your classification system. Ven's expression was unreadable. But her hands on the desk in front of her were very still. She pulled out a small device. She had built it herself over the past 6 weeks. Parts sourced carefully. Nothing unusual in any single order. Together, they made something the colony's systems would never flag. She connected it to the relay node. Not to destroy it. Not to block it. To copy it. Every transmission the node had sent to the Institute over the past 14 months, she wanted all of it. She wanted to know exactly what they had seen. Exactly what they had recorded. Exactly what conclusions they had drawn. The device hummed quietly. A soft green light. Estimated time, 40 minutes. She leaned against the wall. Crossed her arms. Waited. In the silence, she thought about Oren. About the girl with the tea. About the storm and the dark corridors and the people who had moved without being told twice. She thought about what this colony had built. Quietly. Without fanfare. Without anyone from the outside looking in and calling it remarkable. She thought about the wire. About the people on the other end of it. About what they must have thought they would find here. The green light pulsed steadily. 20 minutes remaining. Mara stared at the wall. "You've been watching me," she said softly to nobody. "For 3 years." She let that sit in the silence for a moment. "My turn," she said. The device finished at 0214 hours. She disconnected it carefully. Closed the panel. Walked back to her quarters. Sat at her desk. She plugged the device into her personal terminal. The files opened. And Mara Osei began to read exactly what the Kareth Institute thought of the human species. Her face was calm. Very calm. Her hands were not shaking. But somewhere around the fourth file, around the section titled Tier Classification Justification, Homo sapiens, Provisional Livestock Status, Pending Review, something behind her eyes changed. Not rage. Something quieter than rage. Something that had a much longer reach. She kept reading. She read for 4 hours straight. No breaks. No water. She just read. The files were organized by year. Each one labeled cleanly. Clinical. The kind of language that made horrible things sound like paperwork. Year 1, Baseline Behavioral Assessment. Year 2, Anomalous Deviation Tracking. Year 3, Pattern Escalation. Unresolved. She read about herself in third person. Subject 7F, age 41. Medic grade 2. She read about Oren. He was subject 44M, elderly male. Grief response. Logged and categorized. She read about the storm. About the network map with her name at the center. About SEN's emergency board request. She read the tier classification document 3 times. It was 200 pages. Dense. Academic. Full of citations from other studies on other species. It built its arguments slowly and carefully the way a wall is built, one brick at a time, until you couldn't see over it anymore. The conclusion was on page 194. Homo sapiens demonstrate sufficient neurological complexity to warrant continued observation but insufficient cultural and technological development to qualify for compact protection status. Current classification, Tier 9. Recommended review period, 40 years. 40 years. In 40 years she would be 81. Most of the colony would be dead. Their children would still be Tier 9. Still unprotected. Still observable without consent. Still, the word sat in her chest like a stone, livestock. She closed the terminal. She sat in the dark for 11 minutes. She counted them. Then she stood up. Washed her face. Made coffee with the last of her ration. Drank it standing at the window looking out at the gas belt, orange and slow and enormous, rolling past like it had no idea any of this was happening. She thought about what she had. The files were evidence, but evidence meant nothing without an audience. She could send them to the colony commander. He would panic. She could broadcast them colony-wide. 340 people in crisis solved nothing. She could try to transmit to Earth. Earth was 6 months away by signal. 8 by ship. None of that was fast enough. None of that had teeth. She needed something else. She thought about SEN's emergency board request. The timestamp on the transmission. 3 days ago. Which meant the board had already met. Which meant a decision had already been made. Which meant someone was coming. She was sure of it. She didn't know why. Just a feeling in the base of her sternum that had never been wrong. She went back to the terminal. Opened the colony's long-range sensor log. Ships in the sector. Scheduled arrivals. Nothing listed. She checked the unscheduled traffic band. The one the colony technically wasn't supposed to monitor but did anyway because Levi, who ran the communications bay, had quietly built the capability 2 years ago and never told the commander. One entry. Logged 4 hours ago. A vessel running a Kareth Institute registry. Mid-range transport. Current trajectory placed it at Helix 7 in approximately 60 hours. There it was. She stared at the entry for a long time. 60 hours. She didn't sleep. By 0600 she had a list. Not written down. She never wrote things down that mattered. The list lived in her head where it was safe. 6 names. 6 people in the colony. Each one chosen carefully. Not the loudest. Not the strongest. Not the most obviously capable. The ones who paid attention. The ones who had proven, quietly, without announcement, in the small daily moments that nobody else noticed, that they could hold a secret and think clearly at the same time. She found them one by one through the morning. Pulled each aside. Spoke quietly. Watched their faces as they understood what she was telling them. None of them panicked. She had chosen well. Levi went pale when she showed him the sensor entry. Then he straightened up and asked what she needed. She needed the Institute vessel monitored from the moment it entered the sector. Every transmission it sent. Every transmission it received. Everything. He nodded. Said nothing else. Got to work. Yanni was next. 26 years old. Quiet. Had a memory like a trap. Mara gave her a section of the files to read, specifically the sections about colony members other than herself. Let her sit with it. Gave her 20 minutes. Yanni came out of the room with her jaw set. What do you need me to do? She asked. Remember everything, Mara said. Exactly as it happened. Every date. Every detail. Yanni nodded. Already started. Tomas was the one she was most careful about. He was 53. Former Earth legal system. Contract arbitration. He had come to Helix 7-8 years ago and never said exactly why. Mara had never asked. She showed him the tier classification document. Just page 194. Just the conclusion. He read it. Looked up. His face gave nothing away. Is this authenticated? He asked. I can show you the source. Then yes, he said. Show me the source. By the time the Institute vessel entered sensor range, 58 hours after Mara had found its entry in the traffic log, she was ready. She didn't know what ready looked like from the outside. Probably nothing. She was in the medical bay. Doing her job. Treating a sprained wrist. Updating supply logs. Drinking terrible coffee. But Levi was in the communications bay with a full passive intercept running. Yanni had briefed 3 others. All sworn. All steady. Tomas had spent 2 days reading every file. He had filled 12 pages of personal notes and committed them to memory and burned the pages. The colony commander, a decent man named Harrow whom Mara genuinely liked, did not know any of this was happening. She had made a decision about that too. Harrow was honest and straightforward and completely unable to conceal his emotional state. If he knew, the Institute would see it the moment they landed. She needed the colony to look exactly the same as it always had. Ordinary. Unaware. Going about its quiet unremarkable business. Kareth Institute vessel. 60 hours out. The envoy's name was Dara. She was young for her rank. Sharp. The board had chosen her specifically because she was good at walking into situations that had become complicated and making them simple again. She had read Sen's full report on the journey. All of it. The clips. The network maps. The wire. She wasn't worried about the wire. The relay node was still active. Still transmitting. Whatever the human had thought she found, she clearly hadn't understood it. They never did. That was the thing about Tier 9 species. They were perceptive enough to notice things outside their frame of reference. Not perceptive enough to understand them. Dara had handled 3 disclosure-adjacent situations before. All resolved cleanly. You went in. You assessed. You determined whether any colony member posed a genuine risk to study integrity. If yes, you recommended relocation. The subject was moved to a different station. File closed. She didn't expect this one to be different. She pulled up Mara Osei's file one more time. Read it from the beginning. Subject 7F, Medic Grade 2. Unremarkable background. Moderate intelligence scores. No formal scientific training. No political history. Dara closed the file. Not a threat, she noted in her working log. Likely a coincidence, subject noticed unfamiliar hardware, did not escalate. Consistent with Tier 9 behavioral ceiling. She set the file aside and looked out at the stars. 60 hours. Easy work. Helix, 7. The day before arrival. Mara was in the medical bay when Levi came to find her. He didn't knock. That was their signal. She finished wrapping the bandage she was working on. Sent the patient home. Waited for the door to close. Levi put a small audio chip on the counter. First transmission from the vessel, he said quietly. To the Institute board. Sent about 6 hours after they entered the sector. Mara picked up the chip. Looked at it. Summary, she said. She's assessed you as low risk. Levi paused. She thinks you found the node by accident and didn't understand what it was. Mara set the chip down. What's her name? Dara. Board envoy. Young. Apparently very good at what she does. Mara nodded slowly. One more thing, Levi said. He hesitated. That was unusual for him. She transmitted a recommendation to the board. Pre-arrival. Before she even lands. What recommendation? Levi looked at her. If any colony member shows signs of study awareness, she's authorized to recommend relocation. Immediate. No colony consultation required. He paused. She's already written your name in the provisional list. The medical bay was quiet. Mara looked at the chip on the counter. Then she looked at the wall. At the corridor beyond it. At the colony that 14 months ago had had no idea she was watching back. Okay, she said. Her voice was calm. Completely calm. When does she land? Tomorrow. 0900. Mara picked up the chip. Slipped it into her pocket. Get some sleep, Levi, she said. You look terrible. He almost smiled. Almost. What are you going to do? She was already writing in the supply log. Pen moving steadily. My job, she said. That night she sat at her window again. The gas belt rolled past. Orange and slow. She thought about the woman on that ship. Young. Sharp. Completely certain she knew what she was walking into. Mara had been that certain once. Long ago. Before Helix, 7. Before 16-hour shifts and broken equipment and learning to fix things she had no training to fix. Before Orin. Before the storm. Before the wire. Certainty was a luxury. It required not having seen enough yet. Tomorrow the envoy would land. She would walk through the colony. She would see 340 ordinary humans going about their quiet lives. She would see nothing alarming. Nothing unusual. She would see exactly what Mara needed her to see. And then she would sit down across from Mara Osei for the formal medical check, standard protocol for all visiting personnel, listed in the colony charter, impossible to decline without raising questions, and Tomas would be there. And Yanni. And the chip from the vessel transmission would be on the table. And Mara would begin to explain very clearly and very calmly that the situation was not what the envoy believed it to be. She wasn't going to rage. She wasn't going to threaten. She was going to do what she always did. She was going to show up. Steady. Prepared. With everything she needed already in place. And she was going to make the young envoy understand something that 200 pages of clinical documentation had completely failed to capture. That there was a very significant difference between a species that hadn't been given the chance to prove itself, and a species that wasn't worth the chance. Mara closed the curtain. Set her alarm for 0700. Went to sleep. The ship was smaller than Mara expected. She stood at the edge of the docking bay with Commander Harrow. He was nervous. He kept adjusting his collar. She had told him nothing except that the visit was routine and he should act normal. He was not acting normal. She put a hand briefly on his arm. He took a breath. Steadied. The docking clamps engaged. A low sound. Then the hatch opened. Dara walked out first. She was younger than Mara had imagined. Maybe 30. Tall. Composed in the way that people are composed when they have never had a reason not to be. She wore the Institute's gray. Clean lines. No insignia that Mara recognized, but the weight of rank was there in how she moved. 2 others followed her. Assistants. They carried equipment cases. Dara looked at the docking bay. At the scuffed floors and the patched ceiling and the lighting panel that had never been fully fixed after a power surge 2 years ago. Her face showed nothing. Then she looked at Mara. Just for a moment. A quick professional assessment. The kind that files you and moves on. She extended a hand in the human greeting style. She had clearly been briefed. Envoy Dara. Kareth Institute. Her voice was smooth. Practiced. Thank you for the welcome. Mara shook her hand. Firm. Brief. Mara Osei. Colony medic. She smiled. The kind of smile that meant nothing and everything. We have a room prepared. Whenever you're ready. The formal welcome took 40 minutes. Harrow gave a short address. Dara responded with practiced warmth. She praised the colony's resilience record. She mentioned the storm, said the Institute had been monitoring the sector and was glad all residents were safe. Mara watched her say it. Not a flicker. Afterward there was food. Simple colony fare. Dara ate a small amount and called it excellent. Her assistants took notes on everything. The room. The people. The way the tables were arranged. Mara ate her food and talked to nobody in particular and watched the assistants watch the room. They were good. She gave them that. Their attention moved in patterns, casual looking but systematic. Each one covering a third of the room. Overlapping at the edges. She counted what they lingered on. Faces. Interactions. Body language under the social pressure of a formal visit. They were looking for signs of agitation. Awareness. Anything that suggested the colony knew more than it should. What they saw was Levi complaining about the food portions, which he always did. Old Oren sitting in his usual corner talking to the young father who lived 3 doors down, which he had done every day for 8 months since Mara had quietly introduced them. Children running in the corridor outside until someone's mother called them back in. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Exactly as it always was. Dara relaxed slightly. Mara saw it. A small settling in the shoulders. Almost nothing. There it was. The medical check was scheduled for 1,400 hours. Standard procedure. Colony charter required all visiting personnel to complete a brief health screening before accessing shared colony spaces. It was a formality. Everyone knew it was a formality. Dara arrived at the medical bay at 14:02. Alone. Her assistants had been redirected, politely, naturally, to a tour of the agricultural level with Yanni as their guide. Mara had arranged that too. Dara stepped into the medical bay and stopped. There were 3 people in the room. Mara, standing at the examination table. Tomas, sitting in the chair by the window with a data pad on his knee. And Levi, leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed. Dara looked at each of them. Her composure held, but something behind her eyes recalibrated quickly. "I was told this was a standard screening," she said. "It is," Mara said. "Please sit down." A pause. Brief. Dara sat. Mara picked up a scanner. Ran it in the standard pattern: wrist, chest, temples. All correct. All professional. The results were fine and they both knew it. Mara set the scanner down. "That's the medical part done," she said. Dara waited. Mara reached into her coat pocket and placed the audio chip on the table between them. Dara looked at it. Then at Mara. Her face gave very little away. But her hands, resting on her knees, pressed flat. A small movement. Controlled. She recognized it. "You should know," Mara said, "that we have the full transmission log from your vessel. From the moment you entered the sector." She paused. "Including your pre-arrival recommendation to the board." The room was quiet. "I'm on your provisional list," Mara continued. "I know that. I want you to know that I know that." She folded her hands on the table. "I'm not telling you this to threaten you. I'm telling you because I think we should talk honestly. And honesty works better when both people know where they actually stand." Dara was still for a long moment. Then she said, "How long have you known about the observation program?" 14 months, Mara said. Something moved across Dara's face. Fast. Gone quickly. But Mara caught it. Surprise. Genuine surprise. And underneath that, the first trace of something that wasn't confidence. "The relay node," Dara said. "Yes. You left it active." "Yes." Dara looked at her carefully. "Why?" Mara glanced at Tomas. He opened the data pad and turned it to face Dara on the table. Page 194 of the tier classification document. The conclusion. The 40-year review. The word livestock in its clean clinical casing. Dara looked at the screen for a long time. "I left it active," Mara said quietly, "because I needed to understand what you were looking for. And I needed you to keep looking. Because as long as you were still looking, the review was still open." She paused. "The moment you found what you came for, that review closes. 40 years. Our children. Their children." Dara said nothing. "I left it active," Mara continued, "because the only way to change the outcome was to be in the room when the outcome was decided. And to be in this room, I needed to know everything you knew." She looked at Dara steadily. "Now I do." The silence stretched. Dara looked at the chip. At the data pad. At the 3 people in the room. Her eyes moved with the same systematic precision as her assistants, but slower now. More careful. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "A formal review," Tomas said. His voice was even. The voice of someone who had spent 30 years in rooms exactly like this one, fighting with documents instead of weapons. "On the record. Full Institute Board. We present the case for reclassification. You present your findings. The board decides." "The board already decided," Dara said. "The board decided based on incomplete data," Tomas said. "They built a 200-page classification document and never once asked a human to respond to it. That's not science." He paused. "You know it isn't." Dara looked at him. "And if I decline," she said. "If I walk out of this room and recommend relocation as planned, what then?" Nobody answered immediately. Mara let the silence sit for exactly the right amount of time. Then she said, "Then the transmission log goes to every independent scientific body in the compact." Every one. With a full account of a 3-year covert observation program conducted on an unconsenting population. She kept her voice level. Matter of fact. Not as a complaint. As a published study. Your data. Our response to it. The classification methodology. The 40-year review period. She tilted her head slightly. You spent 3 years documenting us. We spent 14 months documenting you. I think the Compact's ethics committees would find the comparison very interesting. Dara was very still. You'd cause a political crisis, she said. I'd publish a scientific paper, Mara said. What it causes is up to the Compact. The medical bay hummed quietly. The equipment. The ventilation. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary colony going about its ordinary day outside the door. Dara looked at Mara for a long time. Mara looked back. She didn't blink first. She didn't shift in her seat. She didn't fill the silence with reassurance or apology or softening. She just waited. She was very good at waiting. Dara asked for an hour alone. Mara gave her the room. Took Tomas and Levi into the corridor. Closed the door. Levi exhaled. Long and slow. Like he'd been holding it for an hour. She's going to say no, he whispered. Maybe, Mara said. And if she does? Mara looked at the closed door. Then we do what we said we'd do. You're not scared, Levi said. Not accusing. Just observing. Slightly bewildered. Mara thought about that honestly. I'm scared, she said. I've been scared for 14 months. She looked at him. But scared and stopped are different things. Levi nodded slowly. Looked at the floor. Tomas said nothing. He was reading his notes. Preparing. In case the next conversation was the real one. They waited in the corridor. Around them the colony moved. Someone laughed 2 halls over. The smell of the lunch rotation came through the ventilation. A child somewhere was crying and then wasn't. Ordinary life. Continuing. Indifferent to the door it was happening beside. 43 minutes later the door opened. Dara stood in the frame. She looked different. Not broken. Not soft. But something had shifted in the architecture of her expression. Something that looked, if Mara was reading it right, like a person who had just finished arguing with themselves and wasn't entirely sure who had won. I need to make a transmission to the board, she said. Before I agree to anything. That's fine, Mara said. I'll need 2 hours. Take 3. Dara looked at her. You're very calm for someone who just threatened a Kareth Institute envoy. I didn't threaten you, Mara said simply. I told you the truth about your options. There's a difference. Dara was quiet for a moment. Sen said something about you, she said. In his report. Right at the end. Mara waited. He said he thought you were the pattern. Dara paused. Not an exception. The pattern. Her eyes moved across Mara's face. Searching for something. I didn't understand what he meant when I read it. She looked down the corridor. At the scuffed floors. The patched ceiling. The colony living its unremarkable life in every direction. I'm beginning to, she said. She turned and went back into the room. The door closed. Mara stood in the corridor. Levi looked at her. Tomas looked at her. She looked at the door. 3 years they had watched her. 3 years of thinking they understood what they were seeing. Now one of them was in a small room on the edge of the galaxy making a transmission that could change everything, because a woman they had classified as unremarkable had quietly, patiently, methodically made sure that when this moment. Mara put her hands in her pockets. Go get something to eat, she told the others. Both of you. You look terrible. They went. She stayed. She would wait as long as it took. She always did. The door opened at exactly 3 hours. Dara walked out. She looked like someone who had fought a battle entirely inside her own head and come out the other side not quite sure what the terrain looked like now. She stood in the corridor. Mara stood across from her. The board will hear you, Dara said. Levi made a sound. Tomas closed his eyes briefly. Opened them. Mara said nothing for a moment. When, she said. 12 days. That's the earliest a full session can be convened. Dara paused. You would need to travel to the institute. All 3 of you. On my vessel. All 6 of us, Mara said. Dara looked at her. There are 6 people involved in this, Mara said. They all come. Or we publish. A long pause. 6, Dara said flatly. 6. Dara looked at the ceiling. Looked back. Fine. 6. She straightened. The composure was returning. Settling back into place like a tide coming in. You understand this is not an agreement to reclassification. It's a hearing. The board listens. Then the board decides. That's all we're asking, Tomas said. Dara looked at him. Then at Mara. Is it? Mara met her eyes. It's a start, she said. They left in the morning. Commander Harrow stood in the docking bay and watched them go. Mara had told him everything the night before. All of it. He had sat very still at his desk for a long time. Then he had looked up and asked what she needed him to do. She told him to run the colony. Keep everything steady. Be the thing it had always been. He nodded. Said he could do that. At the docking bay door he pulled her aside. Spoke quietly. If this doesn't work, he said. It will work, she said. But if it doesn't? She looked at him. Then we publish. And the fight moves somewhere else. But it keeps moving. She held his gaze. It doesn't stop. Harrow. You understand me. He understood. She shook his hand. Walked into the ship. The docking clamps released. Helix 7 fell away behind them. Orange gas belt rolling past below. Small station. Scuffed floors. Patched ceilings. 334 people going about their lives not knowing that 6 of them were carrying something enormous into the dark. Mara sat by the small window and watched the station shrink. Then she turned away and got to work. 12 days was not a lot of time. She and Tomas spent most of the journey in a small conference room that Dara had allocated them. It smelled like recycled air and institute paperwork. They didn't care. Tomas built the legal argument. Reclassification precedents. Compact charter provisions. 3 cases in the Institute's own history where tier classifications had been successfully challenged and overturned. He knew all 3 by date and docket number. He had memorized them before leaving Helix 7. Mara built something different. She didn't have a legal argument. She didn't have a scientific counterstudy. She had no credentials that the board would recognize. No title. No institutional weight. What she had was the data. Their data. 3 years of it. Every clip Sen had recorded. Every log entry. Every behavioral map and network analysis and anomaly flag. She went through all of it and she built a single document. No legal language. No academic framing. Just the record. What had happened? When? Who was there? What the Institute had seen, and what they had written about it in their own words, in their own files, in the clean clinical language that made human lives look like variables. Yanni helped. Her memory was exact. She could recall dates and conversations and small details that filled the gaps between the official recordings. She sat beside Mara for hours and spoke quietly, and Mara typed. On the 8th day Dara came into the conference room. She stood at the door and looked at the table. At the stacks of organized files. At the 4 people who had been living in this room for 8 days. The board has been briefed on the basics, she said. They know why you're coming. Good, Tomas said without looking up. Dara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, they're not expecting much. Tomas looked up at that. I know, Mara said. You classified us as Tier 9, Mara said. 1 tier above livestock. You built a 200-page document to justify it. It took your best researchers 3 years of direct observation. And at the end of those 3 years your lead researcher sent an emergency transmission to this board saying he believed he had made a very serious mistake. She looked at the far end of the row. Sen was there. She hadn't known he would be. He hadn't been listed in the session briefing. He was sitting at the end of the board row not as a member but as a witness. He looked like he hadn't slept well in 12 days. Their eyes met. She gave him a small nod. He looked at his hands. I'm not here to make you feel guilty, Mara said, turning back to face the full board. Guilt is not useful. I'm here because my colony, 340 people, is currently classified in a way that leaves them without protection. Without rights. Without recourse if something goes wrong. She kept her voice even. I'm here because in 40 years that number will be different people. Still unprotected. Still unrecognized. Still waiting for a review that gets pushed another 40 years down the line. She looked at the chip on the stand. Your researcher watched me for 3 years and called me a pattern, she said. He was right. But not in the way he meant. She looked up. I'm not unusual. There are 340 people on Helix 7 who do what I do. In their own ways. In the small daily ways that your cameras recorded and your models couldn't explain. She paused. There are 11 million humans on Earth doing the same thing. And in the colonies. And on every station and outpost and research post where humans have been sent to live in difficult places and have quietly, without recognition, made those places into something worth living in. The chamber was absolutely silent. That's not a Tier 9 species, she said. She stepped back. She was done. The board deliberated for 4 hours. Mara sat in the waiting area outside with the others. Tomas reviewed his notes. Yanni sat with her eyes closed. Levi drank bad institute coffee and grimaced and drank more. Nobody talked much. Sen came out of the chamber at the 90-minute mark. He walked across the waiting area and sat down across from Mara. She looked at him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I am sorry. For the study. For the classification. For the way he stopped. Started again. I am sorry. Mara looked at him for a long time. I know, she said. Thank you for the emergency transmission. He looked surprised. It didn't change anything. It started something, she said. That's different. He sat with that. After a while he said, the board is arguing about the VETH precedent. Tomasa's argument landed harder than they expected. He paused. I don't know the outcome. But I want you to know, whatever they decide, your document will be published. I will make sure of it. The full record. Mara nodded. The second column too, she said. The second column too, he said. The chamber doors opened at 1347 hours. Then stood in the frame. She looked at Mara. Her expression was not warm. It was not apologetic. It was the expression of a person who had arrived somewhere she had not expected to arrive and was still in the process of deciding how she felt about the journey. The board has reached a preliminary determination, she said. The Tier 9 classification of Homo sapiens is hereby suspended pending a full methodological review of the Helix 7 study data and a broader assessment of human behavioral data across all colonial postings. She paused. During the review period, estimated at 18 months, humans will be granted provisional Tier 5 status and all associated protections. Levi made a sound and stopped himself. Yanni pressed her hands flat on her knees. Tomas exhaled once. Slowly. Then he was still. Mara stood up. Provisional, she said. Provisional, then confirmed. The review will determine final classification. 18 months. Approximately. Mara nodded. Who conducts the review? Then looked at her carefully. An independent panel. Institute appointed. We want a human representative on the panel, Mara said. Not as a subject. As a member. The silence stretched. Then looked at her for a long moment. That would be unprecedented, she said. So is this, Mara said. Another silence. Longer. I will bring it to the board, then said finally. Her voice had something in it that hadn't been there before. Not respect exactly. Something adjacent to it. Something that looked like the beginning of taking seriously. I make no commitments. That's fine, Mara said. Bring it to the board. Then looked at her one more time. Then she went back into the chamber. The door closed. Levi sat down heavily on the bench and put his face in his hands. Not crying. Just breathing. Taking up the space that relief needs when it finally arrives. Yanni turned to the window. The Institute's central atrium was visible from here. Tall. Pale. Full of species moving through their important days. Tomas sat with his notes in his lap and looked at nothing in particular for a long time. Mara stood by the door to the chamber. 18 months. A provisional status. A review that could still go wrong in 100 different ways. A panel seat that hadn't been promised. A board that had bent but not broken. It was not everything. It was something. She thought about Helix 7. The scuffed floors. The patched ceilings. Harrow in the docking bay watching them leave. Oren in his corner talking to the young father. The girl with the cup of tea. She thought about 11 million people on Earth who didn't know that 12 days ago 6 people had boarded a ship carrying their name. She thought about what came next. Because something always came next. That was the thing nobody told you about fighting. It didn't end. It changed shape. It moved into different rooms. It required different tools. But it kept going. So did you. She turned away from the chamber door. Come on, she said to the others. We need to send a transmission to Harrow. And then we need to start preparing for the review. She looked at Tomas. 18 months isn't long. Tomas almost smiled. No, he said. It isn't. They stood up. Gathered their things. Started moving. Behind them the chamber door stayed closed. Inside it 12 of the most powerful researchers in the compact were sitting with a data chip that contained 3 years of their own work, and a second column they hadn't written, and trying to figure out what to do with what they now knew. That was their problem. Mara had her own work to do. She always did. Transmission to Helix 7. Sender, M. Osei. Recipient, Commander Harrow. Provisional Tier 5. Review in 18 months. Working on the panel seat. Keep the colony running. Tell Oren I'll be back in 2 weeks. M. Epilogue. Kareth Institute Archives. Published study. 14 months later. The Helix 7 Reappraisal, a corrected behavioral analysis of Homo sapiens with supplementary notation. Lead authors, researcher Sen. Co-author, M. Osei, Helix 7 Colonial Representative. Abstract: this paper presents a full reanalysis of 3 years of behavioral observation data collected at Helix 7 Human Colonial Outpost. Original findings are presented alongside corrective notation supplied by the observed population. The authors conclude that the original study contained significant interpretive errors arising from the absence of subject perspective in the analytical framework. The implications for tier classification methodology are substantial. The authors recommend immediate revision of the classification criteria for Homo sapiens. The authors further recommend that no future behavioral study of any species be conducted without the informed participation of that species. We did not understand what we were watching. We understand it now. Subscribe for more original HFY stories. The stars may belong to everyone, but history always remembers the ones bold enough to reach them first.